This paper is joint work with Thomas Hindelberg and Jock Rothschild. And okay, so in this audience, this doesn't need too much motivation, but crowdfunding is clearly a growing area. It's now grown into $1 billion industry, and we've recently had the Jobs Act being signed, so it's got a lot of support as a mechanism that will sort of help individuals and small businesses in financing. However, whenever you have any new source of financing, you do need to worry about, what is the right regulation, what are the underlying incentives taking place. In particular, when you're looking at crowdfunding, right, and where you have sort of individuals on both sides, there is always the concern, are sophisticated individuals perhaps taking advantage of other individuals? And our understanding on this area is really very limited. So there are a number of open questions on crowdfunding. Now, one of the, normally in finance, right, we believe that financial intermediaries have a big role. So if we're looking at banks or venture capitalists, they play a big role in sort of certifying and monitoring, the loans or the investments that they make. Now, in crowdfunding, where you don't have, a sort of a formal sort of monitor or a formal certifier, if you will, then, how do markets still work? And one of the things we see in some of the platforms is endogenously group leaders arise who seem to be taking over these functions. And so the question then is, what are the incentives of these players? What are the implications for the kind of loans they make, the default rates, etc.? And do you find, people taking advantage of other people? Okay, and so what we are going to do is we're going to look at peer-to-peer lending using the Prosper sort of data platform. And in Prosper, what you see is you can create groups. So anyone can create a group, and you can become a group leader. And some groups charge rewards, or what are called origination fees, and others do not, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at groups that charge these origination fees compared to groups that do not charge these origination fees. But then what happens is Prosper changes the rules so that groups leaders can no longer charge these fees. And so what we can do is we can look at the groups, sort of before and after. The same groups, when they were charging origination fees, how did they behave? Then after this is eliminated, how did they behave? And we can also, of course, look at the reward groups as compared to the non-reward groups, both before and after. Okay, and so that's essentially the methodology that we are going to employ, right? In particular, we are going to look at group leaders' bidding behavior, right? Because if they are where should you see incentives sort of kick up the most? Strategically, it's going to be in their bids. And we're going to see, how do these bids sort of affect success, the listing success, the interest rates, and the default rates? And we're going to compare before and after. The same group leaders get rewards, then they don't get rewards. Does it change? And we're also going to compare them across to the other groups, right, where there are no rewards sort of before and after. And to preview the results, we essentially find evidence for perverse incentives in crowdfunding, which do not appear to be fully recognized by the market. We see a big difference in the way group leaders behave before and after the elimination of origination fees. When they have these fees, group leaders sort of actively bid, they promote their listings, and the default rates actually are higher. Once these fees are reduced, what we find is group leaders, if you look at their listings, their default rates actually go down very substantially. Now, what are the other mechanisms which sort of overcome these perverse incentives? So one mechanism, even in the presence of origination fees, is if the group leader has sufficient skin in the game. So we do a back of the envelope computation to see, now clearly you're getting these rewards, but if you bid on a loan, you're out on a limb if the loan defaults, but your bid can be as little as $50. So how much do you have to take of the loan so that, your incentives are actually aligned, compared to the origination fee? Now, remember, these are very small loans, and so it turns out to be almost 1/3 of the loan. Now, when group leaders have 1/3 of the loan or more, then you don't see these perverse incentives. They sort of behave correctly. So our work relates to, I won't spend much time on this, but it relates to a lot of literature. There's the literature on, consumer protection and sort of what are the right incentives to give and how should we be advising intermediaries to sort of educate their customers. There's the literature on incentives and the implications of that. There's, when you have these new technologies which just allow new interfaces, what happens? And then there's a growing number of papers on crowdfunding, many of which you see in this conference. So here's a snapshot from Prosper peer-to-peer sort of lending. And essentially here what happens is borrowers create listing. The total amount requested is normally small, less than $25,000. Lenders place bids, and the bids are often just $50, right? And so, how does the market clear? Well, when the bids are more than what's asked, and it will be whatever interest rate sort of clears the market. If you don't have enough bids, then the loan is not successful, no loan is made. Okay, what is the group system? So these groups are sort of self-organized. So you can form a group, become a group leader. You can define the purpose of your group, who are the members, and you can bid. And as I mentioned, the key here for us is you can actually charge origination fees or rewards for successful listing. And Prosper actually eliminates this at some point in time, right? So this is just a snapshot sort of the data. So we're going to look at, the average amount funded is small. It's roughly $8,000. The total amount funded up to the time period we had was like 86 million. So here's just a timeline. And there were many changes that took place on the Prosper sort of database. Now, what we are going to do is we're going to use this. We're going to use this as a sample period. And the reason is because, we can sort of eliminate a lot of the other changes, right? And so the group leader rewards are eliminated on this day, right? And there were two other smaller changes in this time period. We'll do robustness checks to sort of take account of them. Can you hear me? Do I need the mic? Yes. I do need the mic. Okay. So we'll do robustness checks to sort of take care of them. But that's why we define this sample period so that it's clear. We don't have other confounding effects. Okay, so we have in all 150,000 listings. 8% of the listings on average are successful, and they typically, higher credit ratings are more likely to sort of be successful. So if we look at this, the no reward groups typically do the best. Yeah?
You mean 92% are not actually?
No, they're not successful. The conversion rate is low. That's right. So there are a lot of people just trying their luck and saying, I'll do this at this interest rate, and the market doesn't clear because, that doesn't work. So of these, the no reward groups seem to perform the best. They have the highest listing success, the lowest interest rates, and the least default performance. If you look at the reward groups, they don't do quite as well. They actually do better. They have a higher listing success, but than no groups. So like compared to if you have no groups, they have a higher listing success. They actually have even lower interest rates, but their default rates are higher than no groups as well as the non-reward groups, right? And so clearly something is off here, right, if you look at this. And so now the question is, what accounts for this difference in behavior? So we're going to look at bidding behavior to see how that sort of affects things. And what we see is if you look at group leader bids, both in reward as well as non-reward groups, right? If the group leader bids, you're much, much more likely that the listing will become a loan. It's much more likely to be successful. Group leader bids are also typically associated with lower interest rates. So it means investors sort of look at it and say, there's some credibility here. Interest rates tend to be lower. However, if you look at default performance, in reward groups, when group leaders bid, those loans just default a lot more, right? And this is much less true for the non-reward group, particularly in the riskiest loans. So what we're seeing is group leader bids are actually leading to adverse outcomes when the group leader gets rewards, right? And so why so? So our working hypothesis is that they're just adverse incentives. Now, can we get more direct evidence on this? Yes, we can by looking at bidding behavior and by saying, is there a change in how the group leaders bid after the reward is eliminated? So we can compare to the other groups where there are no rewards, but we can also see for the same group, right, is the group leader sort of changing their behavior? And the answer is very much yes. So you can see there are two lines here. The blue line is group leaders which don't get rewards, and you can pretty much draw a straight line through that, right? And so before and after, there isn't much change. But if you look at the groups where they're getting rewards, which is the red dotted line, what you see there is, the group leaders sort of, the number of bids and all sort of decline quite a bit. And so now let's see how this actually changes outcomes. And the short of it is, for no reward groups, there really isn't much change. But for the reward groups, you find that the default rates actually go down substantially. So this suggests that group leaders are doing a much better job now of sort of screening their borrowers, if you will. And so we do a multivariate, we're going to run regressions. You can't see this. The only purpose of putting it is we control for a lot of things, including credit rating and everything else. But here's sort of the summary of what we have. And that is, now if we look at only within reward groups, right, what do we find? Group leader bid before and after, there is sort of a big difference. So if we look at listing success, right, interest rates and default rates, and, I'll rerun this for all of them, but essentially you get the same results everywhere. That once the origination fees or the rewards are removed, right, the way group leaders bid, has a big difference, right? And so and in particular, you're now seeing much lower default rates. Okay, we also sort of now, so this is looking at the default rates, and this is a hazard model, and you can see, before the rewards are removed, if a group leader bids, default rates are higher. Once the rewards are removed, then the default rates actually go down. So what is the exception? The only exception is if there's sufficient skin in the game. So we look at group leaders' bids when the group leader actually has 1/3 of the loan or more, right? And then even in the presence of reward, if group leaders bid, you don't see higher default rates, right? So this is what this is suggesting, right? Saying they are perverse incentives unless you have sufficient skin in the game. We do a lot of robustness checks. We do a diff in diff using the non-reward groups as a reference point, and very similar results to what we have here. Other robustness checks, there were a few other changes. There were 2 other changes that you could list a second loan. We sort of eliminate all borrowers who took a second loan. There was a fee elimination. We do a lot of default robustness checks. I won't bore you with them, but the results are very similar. So what do we conclude? So what we conclude is group leaders are indeed behaving strategically, right? They're bidding, and these bids, investors think they mean the loan is of higher quality because interest rates are actually going down. However, they have higher default rates, which means that investors don't fully recognize these perverse incentives. And it's only when there's sufficient skin in the game that these perverse incentives seem to be fixed. Right? And so what does this suggest? That, if we're looking at this new market, which is growing and which many people are hopeful about, we do need to worry about the underlying incentives, both the regulators, the players, etc. And how do you create this platform in a way that the incentives are sort of correctly aligned so as to get the right outcome is, I think, going to be a very important topic for debate, and we're trying to throw, at least some preliminary light on this based on the evidence we have.